Well, hello once again, and welcome to Elevenses. It's show number 400. I'm Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training, and I'll be offering you a look at some of the talking points and news that have occurred in the last few days, including the announcement from Triumph that there's a new 660 Daytona appearing. So stay with me till the end of the news section for more news on that particular bike. What else have we got to talk about? Well, the Ulster GP sadly has gone from the calendar. Garmin are set to extend their infotainment centres on Yamaha motorcycles. A new series of specific videos aimed at hazard perception are being developed for young riders. Well, I do wonder exactly what's new about them. BT are to convert some of their street cabinets where they have their cabling to EV plug-in charge points. There is a new sodium-ion battery which is claimed to challenge lithium-ion technology, coming from a Chinese company. No sight yet of the Verge electric bike, but it's getting an upgrade anyway. Then we'll have a quick look at that Daytona 660 I just talked about, and finally we'll finish off with a new adventure twin from Kove, the Chinese company, which is going to be, I suspect, a direct competitor for those bikes from Triumph. And then finally we'll finish off with another part of the Making Sense of Crashing series, where I'll be looking at the history of bike training in the UK and just asking very quickly if it works. So stay with me for the next 30 minutes or so. Settle yourselves down with a cuppa. And don't forget, if you have a question, if you've got a comment, anything you want to ask, anything you want to say, I'll try to deal with it during the show if I possibly can. If I can't, it will be at the end of the show. Right, so, all right, on with the first item of the day. Well, I just want to remind you, first of all, about the upcoming talk event, which I will be delivering on camouflage clothing. Now, this is from my Science of Being Seen in-depth series, and basically the idea is to give you an understanding, first of all, of how camouflage works and what that means in terms of clothing. Now, right now, I have to be honest, signings are a little bit disappointing, so I am reminding you again, don't miss it. You will discover a lot of issues with the way that conventional high-vis clothing is actually designed and marketed to riders, and frankly there's little evidence that what we think is effective and is marketed as high-vis doesn't does it really work well. No, as I say, little evidence to suggest that it does. So do pop over, try and join me if you can. Don't forget, it'll go out live on Monday, the 15th of January, 8 p.m. If you can't get it live, it will be available on catch up. So the booking form is in the link, which has just gone up on screen. So do try and pop over there. Do try and join me for the in-depth talk on understanding how camouflage works. Right, now on a slightly lighter note this morning, a Comedy Gold headline greeted me on Monday. Metro, that's an online news site, they told me that the UK was waking up to the freeze of the century, and that Brits were waking up to biting temperatures this morning as Scandinavia's freeze of the century moves in. Now, it's true, there were record low temperatures in Scandinavia last week. Temperatures actually dropped to -30°C in both Sweden and Finland. And it's true that the Met Office had actually issued a yellow ice alert for many parts of the country. Here in London it lasted till 10 a.m, but it was actually 2°C as I dropped my other half off at her volunteer job at 9 a.m, so it was hardly the freeze of the century. It wasn't even a frost, and that was followed by a confident statement that snow is on the way and predicting disruption. And we got a few flurries that afternoon, but nothing settled. In other words, it is winter. And that brings me neatly to the weather for the next few days for bikers. So let's see if I can get that picture up on screen. What are we expecting? Well, the quick summary is cold, mostly dry, but plenty of cloud too, particularly to the east. Now, Wednesday itself, this morning, it's started very bright here. It's a lovely clear morning. It's pretty still as well. And there will be bright spots developing, particularly across the western and southern areas. If you do have fog, it should clear, but there will be the odd outbreak of rain and drizzle. Now, these are most likely to affect eastern coasts. Temperatures are still down in single figures, and they will drop below freezing under clear skies tonight. Now, Thursday is much the same, but it will be a little less cold in the east. Up to a maximum of about 7 degrees Celsius. Friday once again sees cloud across the eastern part of the UK with the best of any brightness across the west. Watch out too for freezing fog. That's likely to develop across parts of Scotland and the far north of England and also Ireland. Saturday, that promises to be much the same east-west split again, but more fog possibly around overnight and snow showers in the north. Now remember, there will be anti-ice treatments on the roads, and that can make surfaces slippery, so be cautious, but also be sure to clean your bike after use too. They will corrode very quickly indeed if you don't clean salt off. Now, longer term, there is some indication of some rather colder weather on the way and possibly some more snow towards the middle of next week, but I'll update you to that on Saturday. Right, okay, so on with the news. Now, the first item is that there is more bad news from the Northern Irish road racing scene. Now, firstly, all events in the Republic have been cancelled due to ongoing insurance problems, which is a real pity for all those people who put all the hard work into putting those races on. But now the Ulster Grand Prix has been scratched from the Northern Irish road race calendar. This is the second of the Northern Irish events to be cancelled this year. The Tandragee 100 was cancelled earlier. The Ulster was, of course, for many years part of the GP racing calendars, and there were some high-profile winners. But the last time this race was run was 2019, and since then, COVID, financial, insurance challenges, they've all combined to prevent the event from running. Now, right now, the Cookstown 100, the Northwest 200, and then the Armoy Race of Legends are all going ahead. So at least there are 3 races to look forward to from Ireland. Next story, it's carnival time in New Orleans, and as usual, the Joan of Arc parade drew a huge crowd to the French Quarter on Saturday, but one of the spectacles was rather unexpected, as one of the bikes leading the procession, the police department bikes, actually caught fire, and this of course was captured on film, as just about everything is these days. So you can see the flames coming from the engine there. Now, it's believed that the fire was put out by someone bringing a fire extinguisher from a nearby establishment, and the police department spokesman did confirm that, quote, an NOPD motorcycle had an issue during the Joan of Arc parade, which created a small fire. No one was hurt. The cause is believed to be electrical, but the exact cause is unknown at this time. The bike has been sent in for repairs. Now, the video, you can find it on following the link, which is just going up on screen. You can hear a voice say, "We need beer," as people empty small cups of liquid over the flames. I'm rather pleased they didn't try throwing Jack Daniels over it, though. So you can watch the video there if you want to. Right, okay, so next story, the National Young Rider Forum. Now, they are developing a new motorcycle-specific hazard perception test, they say, tailored to the needs of young riders. They claim the existing DVSA hazard perception test has reduced casualties amongst young drivers, but it isn't relevant to motorcycles, and frankly, I would agree. Most of the hazards filmed are from the perspective of a car, and they also say, which is also correct, that our youngest riders are overrepresented in crash statistics. Now, the new project is being developed by Dr. Victoria Kroll and David Crundle, Dr. David Crundle of SE2 Solutions, they are described as a spin-out company from Nottingham Trent University. Now, they will be filming hazards from the perspective of a motorcycle, and mainly in urban road environments, which they believe reflects the real dangers faced by riders, and their aim is to improve hazard perception and prediction skills amongst these youngest riders. So, rather like my 60-second safety series, which has now been running for 3 years and has topped over 100 videos. Or maybe they could have taken some of the many real-life crashes from social media, something I've done with my Video Nasty series, which has been running even longer. The big difference, the good doctors are being funded, of course, by the Road Safety Trust in this case. I do it for now, and I rely on you lot for your support. So thanks to Malk for that particular story. Now, if you ask me what's one of the least welcome developments of the last 2 decades, and I'd say it's the appearance of the so-called infotainment centers in vehicles, which mix the controls that you need to actually operate the vehicle correctly, maybe the heater, radio controls, but you're mixing in radio, tape players in the old days, CDs in the old days, MP3 players, and also phone connectivity. Now, quite how legislators ever let these attention distracting systems take root, and particularly to be usable on the move, is actually beyond me. But anyway, they're here to stay, I guess. And Garmin, not to be outdone, that's the company, of course, that provided the previous generation with GPS units, which are now more or less redundant thanks to mobile phones. They are aiming to work with Yamaha to add media integration and what they call enhanced navigation functionality to selected Yamaha motorcycles. This is all part of Yamaha's Connected Vision program. Now, so far, their infotainment centers have appeared on the T-Max and X-Max scooters. Slightly later, they appeared on the Nikon GT, and last year they appeared also on the Tracer 9 GT Plus. And they aim apparently to spread these things right across the range. Now, don't forget, these shows go out on Wednesdays and Sundays at 11 o'clock. They're normally live. Very occasionally a recorded show goes out, and even more rarely I miss a show altogether due to other commitments. But if you want to catch up with a show that you've missed, then the best place to head every time is my YouTube channel, and that's Survival Skills UK, and all the 11s shows are in their own playlist, so you can find them by scrolling back through the list. Do make a bookmark over there, and that'll make it a lot easier to catch up a show you failed to catch live. Now, if there's an area where I think some seriously joined up thinking is needed, it's EV charging. Now, I've talked about this many times on 11s before, and as reported at the end of last year, the government has still failed to roll out their promised network of EV charging points at strategic locations on motorways and major A roads. They just have not appeared. Now, according to figures from ZapMap, there are no less than 53,000, I should say, 906 EV charging points across the UK at the end of December. So we are a long way short of the government's target, which was for 300,000 public chargers, and we're supposed to meet that in the next 6 years or so. But as I've repeatedly said, it's not just in-transit charging that's lacking. For many, EV charging in cities is simply not possible because we don't have off-street parking. But BT, the telecoms group, they announced on Monday that they plan to convert some of their street cabinets, the things that are used to house the phone cabling, to actually also house an electric vehicle charging point. Now, the first unit will be installed at a cabinet in East Lothian in Scotland, and BT said it will be rolling out further trials across Britain in the coming months. So how many charging points will this initiative provide? Well, the answer is 60 60,000, which of course sounds a lot, right up until the moment you realise how many cars are on the road like now. Now, this is all cars, so not just EVs, but there's 30 million of them. So frankly, 60,000 chargers with the increasing uptake of electric vehicles, I think you'll be searching a long time to find an empty one. Now, over to the batteries that they charge up. Now, the world's biggest battery maker is CATL, a Chinese company, rather predictably, and they have just revealed a sodium-ion battery that is claimed to challenge the lithium-ion battery technology for energy density and longevity. Now, they say that their batteries are capable of charging to 80% at room temperature in just 15 minutes. Although presumably that would vary with battery size and the charging current. Obviously it's going to take longer to charge a battery if it's bigger, and it will take longer to charge a battery with a lower current. Now, it's also said to perform efficiently at very low temperatures. Now, that is something that conventional lithium-ion batteries struggle with, as my brother discovered the other day when his car did about 15% less range because of a particularly cold snap. These sodium batteries, though, can discharge to just 10% at temperatures below 20 Celsius, minus 20 Celsius, I should say. So claimed energy density is 160 watt-hours per kilogram, and the article says that's the highest level in the world, but I suspect they mean in terms of sodium-ion batteries. A quick search online actually revealed that the lithium, nickel, manganese, cobalt oxide, NMC batteries, as used in most electric vehicles these days, they actually record densities between 150 to 220 watt-hours per kilogram. But the sodium battery contains no cobalt, and that is in short supply and a very volatile price because of that. And they're also compatible with lithium-ion batteries, and that could help introduce some diversity of battery types and basically start to guarantee the long-term future of EVs. Now, another day, talking of EVs, another announcement from Verge, the Finnish electric motorcycle company. Now, I won't call them a manufacturer because as yet I don't believe they have delivered a single customer bike. I'm willing to be corrected on that by anybody who's got one, but it doesn't stop them upgrading their machines. The bike now has eyes on the road, they say, thanks to 6 high-definition cameras and radar technology. The system will be fitted to the TS Ultra model. Cameras will cover front, sides and rear. The radar is front and rear, and machine learning and AI have been used to predict the movements of other road users to trigger alerts. Verge say it's the first motorcycle in the world to bring such features to two-wheelers. Now, Verge currently has one showroom in Monaco, but they do plan to open more, they say, in the coming months. As it stands, the Verge TS Ultra, as it's now called, will cost you around 44,000 euros with all of its sensing technology. And anyone who's already ordered a TS but not yet got it will get the added tech eventually, I hope. Now, interesting story, and I think a lot of people might have an eye on this one. I've been saying for quite a few years that Triumph have had something of a gaping hole in their model range. It's always catered pretty well for riders with a healthy bank balance, but it has offered relatively limited choices for new and less well-heeled motorcyclists. Now, Triumph have been working to plug that gap, first with the Naked 660 Trident, which we saw a couple of years ago, then the 660 Tiger Sport adventure bike. Bike I actually rather like the look of, actually, and now most recently with the new pair of 400cc singles, which I also rather like the look of. But if you want something vaguely sporty, you're really left looking elsewhere or toward the higher end of the Yamaha catalogue. Now, possibly, of course, towards Chinese bikes. I mentioned the Zontes on Sunday, and as I mentioned, there were 2 of these bikes. There was a 100 horsepower ZT703F adventure bike, and there was also a sportier Z03RR. Which is actually the higher stage of tune at 110 horsepower. But the interesting thing is, of course, that both of those bikes are triples, and that feels like a direct attack, really, on the Triumph's entry-level bikes, specifically these 660s. So the breaking news is that Triumph are on the verge of releasing a comfortable and easy to ride sports bike based on this 3-cylinder motor, said to have internal improvements. So what does it look like? Well, there we go. Let's give you a zoom in on that so you can see it a little bit more clearly. That's the bike. It's named the Daytona, and the engine in this particular machine is said to deliver 95 horsepower, which is actually a bump of 17% over the previous models. It's also said to be stronger at medium and high revs without losing out in the low rev torque department too. But the bike can also be restricted down to 35 kilowatts for an A2 license holder. Now the frame's claimed to be new, fitted with 41mm Showa big piston inverted forks at the front and a Showa rear monoshock. The brakes are twin radial calipers at the front, and the tyres are premium too. They are Michelin Power 6, and you also get the obligatory modes: rain, road and sport, and traction control. Lights are LED, of course, all round. I think it's quite a handsome looking motorcycle actually. The riding position, as you can see, the bars are relatively high compared with the seat, so it's said to be practical rather than track, aiming to be comfortable in the city or on the road. So expect it to be CB650R rather than CBR 600RR. And ready to ride weight is pretty reasonable, 201 kilograms. That's just over 440 pounds. Although you can load it up, of course, with more accessories if you want to, because the Triumph catalogue says that there will be 30 things you can bolt onto it. Now, should Triumph be able to keep the price reasonable, that is somewhere not too distant from the 700, 800 twins from Yamaha, Suzuki and Honda, it should be, I think, a reasonably attractive purchase. It should certainly outperform them. Now it also looks like Triumph are targeting the US with this bike, because it seems that the new Daytona, which was announced yesterday evening, was actually unveiled for the first time in Los Angeles as the first stage of a 20-city British invasion tour to showcase Triumph's newest models. So that bike showed off for the first time in LA. Kevin says, seemingly we're heading towards a ban on new fossil fuel vehicles up against a backdrop of inadequate infrastructure. Well, as I said before, electric vehicles aren't going to replace petrol-engined vehicles overnight. There will be an uptake of electric vehicles, as we're seeing at the moment. They are outselling petrol and diesel, I believe, across the UK. But the existing fleet of petrol and diesel vehicles will not vanish on the day that the ban on the sale of new petrol ICE, diesel ICE comes in. So there will be a period of crossover where more and more ICEs are replaced by EVs. So as long as the infrastructure improvements keep pace, then all well and good. The problem is, as I say, I think it's just the lack of thinking, lack of joined up action on this, which is the real problem. As soon as petrol and diesel sales start to fall, I think you'll see the oil and petrol industry start to install charging points in petrol stations. I've said this before. They won't be able to survive the drop in sales without doing something to recoup some of their revenue. Right, okay, so moving on from the Triumph, let's have a look at the next bike that I want to show you. This one here is the Kove 510 Adventure. Now it's more of a direct competitor to Honda's recently revamped NX 500, previously the CB 500X, but it's the sort of machine that I suspect Triumph have got their eye on too. Now don't forget, Benelli's TRK 502 is actually the best selling machine in Italy, and it has been for several years, and that is a Chinese built bike. So the Italians, who are pretty keen to support their own industry, are buying Chinese built bikes in significant number. Now the new 500 here from Kove follows the now standard adventure bike mold. It's got that upright seating position, it's got the top half fairing in the tall screen, it's got reasonable looking pillion accommodation, and let's just zoom in on it so you can see a little bit more clearly. The LED lights, of course, bodywork protection, and there's also that small but practical rack at the rear, something I wish all bikes came with actually. Power comes from a 47 horsepower 35 kilowatt 498cc liquid cooled fuel injected parallel twin, and that drops it of course straight into the A2 license class. The engine generates a decent 45 newton meters or 33 pound-feet of torque. Top speed said to be around 105 miles per hour or 170 kph. The frame itself is a robust steel tube, which I never think is particularly a bad thing, but it does get an aluminium swing arm. KYB supply the 41mm upside down forks and the fully adjustable rear monoshock, and that's actually a step up on most bikes in this class if it genuinely is fully adjustable. The wheels are also fitted with Metzler tyres, which is a bonus. And they're this fairly standard sort of road orientated adventure bike with a 19-inch front and a 17-inch rear, probably perfect for negotiating the pothole hell we have at the moment. Braking's dealt with twin front discs, single rear, no word on who manufactures those. Now weight is a not too bulky 205 kilograms, so pretty close in fact to the Triumph I've just looked at. 451 pounds in fact, they're about thereabouts. And given the tank holds 20 litres of fuel, I'd say that's pretty acceptable weight. Now it's priced at the moment at €6,990, which calculates at just over £6,000 at today's exchange rate, so a competitive price. Right, so moving on to our final item today. It's the in-depth section where I will look at a particular topic, and we're returning to a series I started before Christmas where I'm attempting to make sense of crashing. Now, one of the statements that we hear fairly regularly is that road users aren't educated enough. Now that's a polite way of saying what many people think about everybody else who uses the road, of course, if not themselves. And it's often said about motorcyclists too. See that story earlier in the show where the statistic about motorcyclists, young motorcyclists being overrepresented in crashes is trotted out, and so those new hazard perception videos are being commissioned and aimed at those riders. Now today I will look at the background to motorcycle training in the UK, and if you're a more recent rider you may be surprised to discover that interventions aimed at training powered two-wheeler riders have a very long history indeed. Now, first to arrive was the UK driving test for motorcycles, and the aim there was to match the test that had been already introduced for car drivers. Now this came in on the 1st of June 1935, and allowing for the 6-year introduction caused by World War II, it followed quite quickly that there was an interest in upskilling riders through training. Now when I was actually looking back some years ago into the history of motorcycle training here in the UK, I was surprised to discover that the RAC, the Royal Automobile Club, they had actually been connected with motorcycle training as far back as 1947. So that's just 2 years after the war finished. But I couldn't actually dig up any details on what that scheme was, how widespread it was or anything else. But certainly by the early 1950s, the RAC had collaborated with the ACU, that's the Auto Cycle Union, the UK governing body for motorcycle sport, to create the ACU RAC scheme for rider training. Now this was voluntary, you didn't have to take it, you could simply jump on a motorcycle with L plates on and ride away, which is in fact exactly what I did back in the day. It was also volunteer led, but the scheme grew significantly from those early 1950 days till it was financially backed by local councils during the mid 1970s, and there were lots and lots and lots of places you could do this training. Certainly when I started riding all the way back in 1975, don't shout that too loud please, it was the only way you could get some training, and it involved 24 hours of instruction. It was spread over 12 weeks, so 2 hours or so per session. It often ran weekday evenings. Unfortunately, my local scheme operated Sunday mornings, which just happened to be exactly the same time I was playing cricket. Now, was it any good? People often sort of doubt the efficacy of these voluntary training courses. Well, a report called the a Scoping Study on Motorcycle Training, which dates from the early 80s, it said during 1981 observations were carried out at 42 RAC ACU training centres. That's a big sample, and the report on the observations was published. It was noted that pupil instructor ratios were good and that few errors escaped the notice of instructors. Now, less favourably, the scheme did say that the administration and record keeping was variable, and there were also issues in terms of the content and the method of delivery of the program. They did come in for some criticism, but overall it seems like it was quite a favourable review. So what happened next? Well, after 30 years of the RAC ACU voluntary scheme teaching riders, the government decided to introduce some changes to the motorcycle test to make a test actually mandatory before you went on to take the motorcycle test itself. And this actually killed off the RAC ACU scheme. So what happened? Well, if you're old enough to remember the Part 1, Part 2 motorcycle test, Part 1 was a short off-road bike handling test, not entirely dissimilar to the current Module 1 part of the bike test which we have at the moment, and you could take that either at an HGV testing site in front of a motorcycle examiner if you could get a slot, or more likely you went to a training organisation and there you took the test after some training, and then if you passed it you were signed off by a certified instructor, much the same way that CBT certificate is written up now. So what was wrong with that? Well, the problem was that it required an off-road site, and not too surprisingly, the RACACU said they couldn't actually afford to fund the investment that would be needed for them to continue with this rider training testing regime. Now, what happened next? Well, some of their training schemes went solo and found some off-road training areas themselves, and they created some of the very first independent schools that we had in the UK. The school I worked at in Romney Marsh, Cinque Ports motorcycle training, they came directly from this background. I think they originated in 1981 directly to deliver this Part 1 test. Now, at the same time, there was also the first attempt at a countrywide school. Now, this was Star Rider. They sort of stepped into the void left by the demise of the RACACU scheme with their National Motorcycle Training Scheme, the NTS. Now, meanwhile, the BMF and the ROSPA organisations, they both announced that they had plans to take over the now dead RACACU scheme. The government, meanwhile, belatedly realising that they'd actually managed to kill off that 30-year-old voluntary scheme in the name of road safety, they actually introduced a fund of £100,000, which is a paltry sum even then, to subsidise the new training regime. And then in one of their more inspired moves, they gave it all to ROSPA, who are not one of the least well-funded voluntary organisations out there. Now, not too surprisingly, the BMF, who are only funded by motorcyclists, they kicked up a fuss, and eventually they got an even more miserable £10,000 to develop their own scheme. Now, as it happened, ROSPA soon pulled out of motorcycle training, but at the peak, which was in the 1980s, the BMF had at least 185 centres across the UK, which actually included a number of former Star Rider centres, which had been left in limbo when Star Rider's parent company went bust. Now, in 1989, the much better Pursuit test replaced the old round the block 10-minute test that I took. And passing the bike test actually got much harder at this point. And it got harder still the following year when CBT was introduced with its its DSA licensed instructors. Now, unfortunately, the BMF scheme in turn didn't long survive the introduction of direct access, of CBT. Now, although some sites did continue to try operating, I was actually investigating working for a BMF site as a paid instructor somewhere in the mid-90s, I can't quite remember when. But the increased rigor of the DSA check tests on instructors effectively finished these voluntary schemes off. Site after site lost their ATB status as instructors were stripped of their training cards. Now, at this time, CSM, Chelmsford School of Motoring, if I remember correctly, they had gone the other way. They'd started as a local training school, and they had moved, bought up or developed site after site, and they had become at one point a sort of de facto national training school. I believe they actually had more than 100 franchise sites at one point, and they stretched from the south of England into Scotland. So they covered virtually the entire country, but they had their own problems, and they in turn did not survive the introduction of the direct access scheme, which brought in training on big bikes in 1997. Now remember what happened then. They cited reduced profits, and they folded around 2000. I can't remember the exact year, 2000 or possibly 2001, I think. But I do remember they laid off their staff via a Christmas card, which was, I thought, a nice touch. Now, in recent years, we've seen the theory test introduced, the hazard perception test being added to the theory test, and then we've seen the off-road manoeuvres making up module 1 of the current two-part test that was introduced in 2011. And of course, we also now have the complex system of stepped motorcycle licenses, where riders moving up each stage are required to repeat the exact same on-road bike test. And of course, we also have a significant number of interventions, everything from the sort of voluntary bike safe to the enhanced rider scheme, aimed at riders with a full motorcycle license. So that brings us pretty much up to date. We've got a mix of a few schools with multiple sites and a lot of schools that operate from just one or maybe 2 or 3 locations. So what has been the result of all this? Well, since the end of the Second World War, it's true to say there has been a huge reduction in the number of fatalities and serious injury rates for motorcyclists, although that improvement has plateaued since 2011, 2012. Basically, those rates have just flattened completely. Now, what can we conclude from that significant drop, though, right up to the 2011-2012 period? Well, it's certain that the drop in casualties is real. It peaked in the early 50s, but it's also true to say that at that time there were a hell of a lot of motorcycles in use. They were day-to-day transport for the majority of people. But it's likely then that at least some of the reduction that followed through the late 50s into the 60s and up to the mid 70s was simply down to fewer riders being on the roads as more people bought cars. Now, more recently, going back to around 2000, for example, we can see that there has been a genuine rise in motorcycle traffic, and that has actually been against the background of a steady reduction in casualties, fatal and serious injuries. But what we cannot say is how much of that improvement has resulted from training. Now, it's likely, though I don't think anybody has ever actually asked the question and researched it, it's likely, I would say, that at least some of that reduction in casualty figures has resulted from steady technological improvement. We have bikes that handle significantly better now than they did back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, even into the 80s. We have brakes that work in the rain. My first 404, I recall well, if it rained, you put the brake on, and then you waited a couple of seconds for anything to happen. Tyres too, quantum leap forward on what was available to me in the mid-70s and right into the 80s, in fact. Most recently, of course, we have ABS, which means that even if you do make a complete mess of your braking, the bike will still stop. And more recently, you've got traction control, rain modes and all that kind of thing, where the rider can take some control of what the bike is doing. Now, we've also seen far better quality motorcycle clothing, and we have seen the more consistent use of protective clothing. You know, most people, when I was starting to ride, did ride around in a pair of denims. Most people these days do not do that. If they are wearing denims, they're almost inevitably armoured. And body armour itself, it may not prevent broken bones, there's little evidence it does that, but it does certainly prevent skin abrasion injuries. And we shouldn't overlook the fact there have been significant improvements in helmet design too, particularly in terms of helmet retention in crashes. But here is an inescapable observation when you look at the crashes themselves. When we do crash, we're still being caught out in exactly the same situations that caught out our great-grandparents back in the 1950s. And that means we're having the same crashes. So I can fairly confidently state that training may have changed the way that riders learn to ride, but it hasn't changed the way we crash. And that really should lead us to a very uncomfortable question. If we've got over 60 years history of testing and training and better riding books, incidentally, just why are we still having these crashes in the exact same places? Now, the answer may be anecdotal, but it is a question that hardly ever gets asked. So next week I will go into a little bit more detail on this, and I'll start to look at some research-based investigations into the effectiveness of rider training. Right, okay, so that is pretty much it for today. If you have enjoyed the show, please take a moment to subscribe to my channel, like the video if possibly can, whether you're watching on Facebook or you're watching here on YouTube. Do drop me a like if you can. Check out my other videos, of course. There's the 60-second safety series and the 60-second science series too. They all offer you really useful information, and they're in a quick to watch, quick to digest format, and I have tried to make them accessible to new riders as well as informative to more experienced riders too. So that is it for today. Don't forget the presentation on next Monday. Do make it along if you possibly can. Anything else we have to say? Kevin says, some live in the moment, dodging traffic, laughing at near misses while relying on adrenaline and reflexes. Arguably, mindset is an overlooked factor. Yeah, I wouldn't disagree. I don't think we address that at all as things stand. And I will actually, I've already roughed out next week's article, and you'll see that I will actually address that as I talk about training next week, next time out. Right, okay, anything else to say? No, that very much is it. So if you are out and about today, remember the weather is chilly, and watch out for those icy surfaces. There are still a lot of flooded areas, so you could come across ice around at any corner, and watch out for slippery road treatments too when the frost returns. That's it from me today. I trust you've enjoyed the show, and we'll see you for the next one on Sunday, if I hope. So that's it. Do stay shiny side up if you're out there today.